Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. Our show is about what is ahead politically for the U.S. in 2018. Where does President Trump stand with his approval ratings? Will there be negative fallout from his rejection of the Iran deal, the timing over the opening of the Jerusalem embassy, and the ensuing unrest in Gaza? What will happen at the fragile summit meeting in Singapore with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, if the meeting happens at all? Will the House of Representatives flip in the midterm elections? If the House becomes Democrat, will the new Congress file a bill of impeachment against President Trump sometime next year? Here to help us answer these pivotal questions is someone who can see the future. He is Doug Schoen. Doug is the keenest political analyst I know. He is a columnist and author, a Fox News contributor, and a deadly accurate pollster. I'm delighted to welcome Doug Schoen back.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
So let's talk about Trump's approval ratings.
Sure.
I mean, I had kind of been brainwashed into thinking they were somewhere in the high 30s, just confined to his traditional base. And then your colleague Rasmussen said they've improved recently. They're up to around 50% or more.
Yeah, I think 50% is an exaggeration. The average of where his approval rating is based on all the polls around 42, 43%. But that is a steady upward movement. And I think it's clear that notwithstanding the scandals or alleged scandals surrounding the president, that really hasn't impacted his standing with the American people.
Why do you think that's so?
Because people tend to make decisions based on their own economic circumstances, not based on the scandal du jour.
Senator Pat Moynihan said that you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Famous statement he made.
Yes.
And we find that people's interpretation of these scandals kind of falls out along partisan lines.
It does, and we haven't had a report from the special counsel, Bob Mueller, so we're not really even sure, Jim, what the precise facts are. Now, the swirl of events between Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels and the Russians, we really don't know specifically what happened, when it happened, which is why the Mueller report, which I suspect we'll see in the next couple of months, is so pivotal.
Well, do you think he'll get it out before the midterm elections?
My best guess is he will. You know, he's been talking about interviewing the president. I doubt that'll happen. And if he doesn't interview the president, arguably, what else is there left to do? He's been at this over a year. So my guess is you see it in, June or July. If we don't see it by mid-August, what you're now positing could well be the truth after the election. I don't think we're going to see it in September.
Well, I think the Justice Department regulations that say that they shouldn't issue reports like this that might influence an election, there was that problem in 2016.
Well, was that problem, and perhaps Jim Comey missed some of those regulations.
Well, I think he probably read them, but he misinterpreted them.
I think he did misinterpret them.
Now, your polls would show that the country continues to be deeply divided along partisan lines.
Correct, yes.
50 years ago, people, according to the polls, didn't want their children to marry outside their race or religion. Now they're perfectly comfortable with that, but they say they don't want their children to marry someone outside their political party or political persuasion. I mean, the divide, partisan divide, couldn't be clearer.
I think it's a partisan divide, Jim. It's also a cultural divide. If you socialize with Republicans, as I know you've occasionally been wont to do, and socialize with Democrats, they live in really different realities, different cultural milieus, certainly, as you say, different ideological worlds.
Now, we talked about the scandals as influencing Trump's approval rating, but what about his foreign policy? At times it looks as if he might be startlingly successful. North Korea, China, and at times it looks like he's zigging and zagging. And the China trade negotiations, which are occurring now in Washington, even as we speak, and the possibility that the North Korean summit might be called off. What do you make of his foreign policy? Is he going to win the Nobel Peace Prize, or is he going to go further down in the polls?
I wish I had an answer to that, but literally, if you had asked me that question 2 weeks ago, before the abrogation of the Iran deal, I would have said he's on track to have a summit with the North Koreans that appeared, at least at that point, to lead to a deal towards denuclearization. Well, as we sit here today, the summit is in question. Relations between North and South Korea are in question because of the U.S.-South Korean military exercises that the North Koreans had said wasn't a problem at least a month or so ago. The Iran deal has alienated us, or the abrogation of it, from our allies. And in Gaza...
But you thought he made the right decision in abrogating the Iran deal.
I did think on the merits. As I sit here today, I say to myself, maybe he could have kept the deal in place, made the same objections, and tried to renegotiate. I think it was a bad deal. I'm not happy with it, but I'm also not happy with being estranged from all of our traditional allies.
Well, there's the argument against abrogation that it hurts our credibility around the world. It hurts our credibility with the North Koreans. It
sets a high bar for getting a deal with the North Koreans.
That's right. And he says he wants a better deal with the North Koreans than he made with Iran, but it's hard to really understand what better deal he could make with the North Koreans than he had with Iran.
Well, the principal objection, as I understand, and certainly my concern with the Iran deal, was it allows them to go nuclear in 7 years. I don't think he's going to do a deal with the Koreans that says, well, just suspend everything for 7 years and then start up. That was I believe, the agreement in 1994 that Robert Gallucci negotiated, which they cheated on before the 12-year period was over. And I think Trump, of necessity, would have to get a stronger deal. But really, as we sit here today, Jim, it's absolutely unclear to me whether such a deal is possible.
And certainly abrogation undercuts our commitment to compromise, our commitment to diplomacy, our commitment that when we make a deal, that's a deal.
Well, that's certainly the case, and that's why I, on reflection, say, while my attitude towards the deal hasn't changed at all, I wonder if we had stayed in the deal but said, here are our objections, here's what we want to renegotiate, we would have been in a better position with our allies, and I dare say, with the Iranians.
Well, what about our relationship with our allies? I mean, isn't this really strong medicine for them? Are we prepared to sanction our allies if they deal with Iran?
That's very much an open question, and at least some companies are starting to heed the sanctions that we put in place, but whether that'll be widespread and a near unanimous, time will tell.
Now, what about the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem? Was that a good decision, and how does that play with voters?
Well, that's been our stated position for as long as I've been in politics. No president has acted on it. Trump did. We've had, 59 deaths and over 2,000 injuries. Let's hope the level of violence goes down. At the same time, it plays in, and I think that's the theme of your question, with uncertainty with our allies in Europe, potential hostility from at least some of our allies, new and old, in the Middle East, and raises the specter of the U.S. being totally isolated. That's the fear.
What about the trade position with China, which, recently Trump reversed himself on this Chinese telecommunications company, ZTE, and it looks as though he caved in to China. It showed weakness, and doesn't that affect our posture with the North Koreans? It seems almost a little more than coincidence that North Koreans threatened to call off the talks right after Trump tweeted that he was willing to relax the sanctions on ZTE.
I think the logic there, Jim, as I understood it, was by acceding to the Chinese wishes on ZTE, we would get their help with North Korea. Clearly, as we sit here today, that's very much an open question.
Well, there were two meetings in a row between President Xi of China and Kim Jong-un, which seemed to turn things around. But with Xi seeing that Trump is so malleable, the question is, well, does he really believe that Trump is anything more than a paper tiger?
Let's just say when Trump said after the Mar-a-Lago summit that this had been a great meeting and everything had worked out, I had a sense...
That's the one where Xi was eating cake for dessert.
Yes. I had a sense that Xi was playing three-dimensional chess and Trump was playing checkers. And I don't think there is a China policy. I get what our stated position is, but on a week-to-week, day-to-day basis, it's hard for me, and I dare say others, to divine what our precise policy and intentions are.
If talks break down in Washington, do you think the United States is prepared for a trade war with China?
We say we are, but I don't think we are. I think that Trump is not going to let that happen. But again, if I had said to you 2 weeks ago, here's what's going to happen in the world, you might well have questioned me.
25% tariffs, and then what is China going to do to Boeing, and what are they going to do to...
They're going to slap on retaliatory tariffs as we would do in the same circumstance. And we have indeed with steel and aluminum.
That picture doesn't look very promising in terms of U.S. trade negotiations.
It doesn't, but things turn on a dime. And
they seem to have turned on a dime a lot recently.
Well, they have. And, you know, we could make a pronouncement about U.S.-China trade policy and relations, and it could change tomorrow.
Now, what about Trump's relationship with Russia? I mean, the Congress almost unanimously voted increased sanctions on Russia because of their interference with the 2016 election, and Trump has failed to implement the sanctions.
Again, it is hard to know what Trump's precise policy is vis-a-vis Russia. I am glad he gave lethal weapons to Ukraine. I think that's a good thing. But the stated intent of getting along with Putin clearly has not worked to provide material or political benefits to the United States. So your guess is as good as mine, Jim.
There's every reason to believe that Russia will proceed to try to hack the midterm elections in 2018, this year. Do you see Trump doing anything to prevent that?
Again, let's hope that our cybersecurity task force inside the government, as well as the 17 or 18 intelligence agencies we have, are taking steps to try to both root out and preclude the degree of hacking that did occur. Because while we're not really sure what, if any, was the nature of collusion in the election, it's very much a settled matter that the Russians did intrude. They did intrude very, very significantly. And while they may not have impacted the election directly, they sure had much more involvement and, I dare say, day-to-day impact than any of us would want.
Well, they certainly tried to impact the election.
They sure did.
And that is enough. And wouldn't you expect that the commander-in-chief would say, you did it, we're going to sanction you, and this is not going to happen again?
Well, we have sanctioned them, and we've sanctioned more people, but the commander-in-chief has not said what you've said in the words you've used, and I am disappointed he hasn't.
Disappointed. Now, let's move on to the midterm elections, which we confronted with in November of this year. 435 seats in Congress up for grabs. The Democrats need to take 23 seats to flip the House of Representatives. You think they're going to do it?
Now, before I answer, Jim, we need a little history. I have been offering...
Started in 1789.
Well, no, my history, and I came a little later. I've been offering predictions on this show, I think going back 10, 12 years, if I remember correctly. I think most, if not all, of my predictions have come true, and where I've been wrong, you've supplemented and probably gotten it right too.
You've been our grand visitor.
Okay, so before I predict, I need to get on air from you a public invitation back after the election to be able to chortle when I'm right.
You've got it.
Great, okay. Democrats win the House, 40 retirements. They've raised state and local taxes on the West and East Coast and blue states. I see the Democrats winning the House, if not comfortably by 5 to 7 seats. You've heard it here.
Well, look at the primaries that just took place. Certainly in Pennsylvania, it was the more liberal Democratic candidates who prevailed. People endorsed by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
I saw that.
They prevailed over the moderates.
Right.
So you go into the general election and you have a Republican there screaming and yelling in close races. These are socialists. These are Elizabeth Warren. These are Bernie Sanders. Are they going to have any chance to get in?
The Democratic platform, as far as I can tell, is resist. Midterm elections, particularly in the first term of an administration, tend to be referenda on the incumbent. With Trump at 42, 43, the generic vote at +6 or +7 for the Democrats, that should be enough to give the Democrats enough seats, given, as I said, the vacancies, the lead the Democrats have. And since elections tend much more to be about the incumbent party than it is the challenger, my guess is voters will overlook it now. But in 2020, Jim, and I've got 2 or 3 invitations I've got to take up before then, I still believe that the favorite to win re-election is Donald J. Trump.
All right, so we're in 2020, but let's stick for a moment.
We should stay in 2018.
Let's stick for a moment with 2018. The gerrymandering played a role in Pennsylvania.
Right.
The Supreme Court said that they had to redistrict. And there were at least 3 seats which were Republican seats, given the pterodactyl kind of gerrymandering that existed in Pennsylvania, which now are either competitive or are going to be Democratic seats.
Well, that's it. And I think that the advantage there, plus the weakness of the Republican Party on the coast, plus the 40 retirements, gives the Democrats a decided advantage. The Senate, which I suspect we're getting to now, is a whole different kettle of fish. You've got 26 Democrats up, 9 Republicans, and while I can see the Democrats picking up maybe 1, best case 2 Senate seats, the Republicans, I think, have a chance to win 2, 3, 4 seats. And as I sit here today, I am predicting the Republicans to hold the Senate.
But there are 2 interesting races, aren't there? There's one is Joe Manchin, a Democrat, a moderate in West Virginia, who's facing a very formidable challenge.
Morrissey,
from Morrissey. How do you think that one's going to?
I think Manchin wins.
You think Manchin as an incumbent?
Yeah, I think as an incumbent and somebody who is clearly distanced himself from the National Democratic Party, I believe Joe Manchin will win. Divisive Republican Party primary will help him, so I'm betting on Manchin narrowly.
And I mean, Manchin was early to endorse Gina Haspel as director of the CIA, so he's not voting at his party's call.
He's probably the Democrat who's voted most against his party.
And then you have this very interesting election in Texas with Ted Cruz and this dynamic challenger, Beto O'Rourke. I mean, you want to love the guy. He's so warm and appealing.
Yeah.
What's going to happen there?
I think Ted Cruz is reelected.
He's reelected.
Yeah, I think the political culture in Texas is still sufficiently Republican and conservative that notwithstanding O'Rourke's appeal, that Cruz will be reelected. Though, Jim, nothing would make me happier than to send Cruz packing.
Do you see Beto O'Rourke having a political future in Texas?
You know, I don't know. It depends how close he gets. The one thing that could...
He's supposed to be within the margin of error.
Yeah, he is in some polls. He's also raising a lot of money. And if, in fact, he is able to stay close, raise money continually, and be on TV, my prediction could, in a rare instance, be wrong.
Okay, so we move along to 2020, where you've been so rash as to predict the re-election of Donald J. Trump. If he, first place, do you think he'll be challenged in the Republican primary?
No, I don't.
Not by Mitt Romney, not by John Kasich?
Not Mitt Romney, and if John Kasich ran, he'd get 20% of the vote.
Not by Jeff Flake?
I don't see it, no.
Not at all. So he's got the nomination.
That's what I think.
And if we can project forward what we have today, to 2020, you see a failed presidency, don't you? I mean, 30% of his appointments have proved to be disasters. They either resigned or were fired in the White House. You have a foreign policy which seems to be a non-policy that every foreign policy expert has criticized as being flawed. You've had now 2 secretaries of state. You've had 3 national security advisors. How can he possibly seek re-election? What is he going to say he delivered on, except promises that were rash?
The economy's stupid.
The economy's stupid.
Yeah, I mean, I think the economy's been in pretty good shape. I think most commentators and ordinary people would acknowledge that. And I think that's how typically people vote. And also, you're talking about a divided Democratic Party. And as you said before, presciently, if the Democrats nominate a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren type candidate or one of those two, I think the contrast will ultimately work to Donald Trump's advantage.
Well, what are the Democrats going to campaign on in 2020 or even in 2018, except I'm not Trump?
I think they're going to say I'm not Trump, and I think they're going to cite the scandals and cite the perceived ineptitude in foreign policy. That's what I think they'll do. But I don't think that's a winning message in 2020. And in 2018, I think it's probably enough to give them the House, but not much more.
And by the way, if they flip the House, as you've predicted, do you think they'll file a bill of impeachment against Donald Trump?
Yeah, I do.
You do?
I do. I think, again, I'm predicting here my crystal ball. I think Bob Mueller's report will, at the very least, suggest a number of instances of obstruction, or what he calls obstruction. And I know that constitutional scholars disagree whether a president can engage in obstruction given his powers. But I think Mueller is going to say that there were multiple cases of obstruction. It isn't clear to me whether he's going to be able to make a case on collusion, but...
Well, collusion, I guess, is lawyers call that conspiracy.
Yeah.
And there certainly is a lot of circumstantial evidence.
There is.
And why would there be obstruction unless he's worried about collusion?
Well, because people, as you have seen, cover up even when they don't need to. I mean, that story on the airplane when they had that meeting with the Russians in June of 2016, when it was, quote, supposed to be about adoption, when it clearly wasn't. From where I sit, I don't understand why the Trump campaign or the Trump presidency didn't say, you know, this guy came to me, somebody we knew, said, listen to these Russians. We came, we listened. That was that. One-shot deal. What's the big deal?
Because it's illegal.
To listen to them?
It's illegal to listen to them because Trump Jr. Went on your channel.
I don't, it's not my channel. It's the channel I work for.
That's Fox, and interviewed by Hannity, and he said, and I probably pressed her for information. Now, the law reads on solicitation of a foreign national for something of value for use in an election campaign. So he solicited. He took the meeting. And Michael Hayden says that was in and of itself compromat, that they would take the meeting and then subjected themselves to blackmail. And that's why they ran away from it. It was a hot potato.
Yeah, I somehow think if that is what the case on collusion entails, it's a pretty weak case.
Well, that won't be the only element. But in any event, Mueller files his report, but then they file a bill of impeachment.
Which I think will happen.
It goes to the Senate, and as Roy Cohn, Trump's mentor, used to say, screw the law, who's the judge? And if the judge is the Senate, Trump will not be convicted.
That's what I was going to conclude. Barring any substantive evidence of either collusion or malfeasance by Trump that we are not aware of. And so far, I've seen nothing that would even rise to that level.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
I always have a question.
You have
for
many
and
questions.
You always answer it so well.
Thank
And
you.
my question is, will the House flip? In 2018, you've perhaps answered it, but please tell us why.
The House will flip. We have 40 Republican retirements. We have a sea of blue on the west and east coast where Republicans are in trouble in substantial measure because of a tax bill that was punitive. And we have public opinion, which typically holds the party in power, the Republicans, accountable. They only passed one piece of legislation, the tax bill, which in and of itself is not popular. So I believe, yes, Jim, the House will flip.
And if the economy tanks in 2020, your prediction would be Trump is toast.
If the economy tanks, all bets are off, but I'm not going to predict anything based on hypothetical events 3 years hence.
No predictions based on hypothetical events. Doug Schoen, thank you.
Jim, thank you
by.
always.
This has been just marvelous.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Take care and all the best.